thought I'm going to use it. I'm going to milk it for the day. So it's a day to recognise and celebrate you, us, our Greater Manchester people profession. The theme of this year's International HR Day, and who knew anything about that sort of 3 years ago? I have to say that, you know, there have been some positives that have come out of the challenges of the last 2 years. Is HR shaping the future? Something we all have an important part to play in health and care in Greater Manchester, particularly as we move from our current arrangements to NHS GM and the new ICS arrangements. It's lovely to see so many of you here. That's fabulous. It's a nice thing to do on a Friday, and thanks for taking the time to do it. So at some point, it'd be really good if we could all take 5 minutes to look at how people professionals across the world are celebrating. So Shenny's has put the hashtags that we're asked to use in the chat. And so obviously you can look at what else is going on there as well, and shout out about some of the amazing work that you and your teams are doing. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself, did I, at the beginning? Sorry. So yeah, I'm Janet Wilkinson, for those that I haven't met before. I'm Chief People Officer Designate for NHS GM, the new ICB for Greater Manchester. So I'm going to hand over now to Claire Marie, who's going to explore the importance and impact of culture, macro perspectives of change, and why it's important to focus on us and our mindset and well-being so we can be at our best. Hope everybody enjoys the session, and yeah, over to you, Claire Marie.
Thank you very much, Janet and Shenny. Thank you for inviting me to come and play today. I did not know there was an International HR Day, so I'm delighted. I will be using that all day on lots of unsuspecting people.
Janet Wilkinson. Yeah.
So
somebody needs to spend their mic off before you say something awful about me.
So I've got some slides here, and Shenny's going to be my Chris Whitty, I think, for the rest of the session. Is that right, Shenny? And as I said, we're going to be talking about the power of people, and particularly looking at change, culture, and well-being. And I think, you know, this really leads into how HR is going to be shaping the future. So let's get started. Our next slide. This quote, I'm sure you're quite familiar with it, but it really resonates with me. You know, if we want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And that's what happens in our organizations. You know, it's not about us individually going fast. It's about us going far, and we have to take people with us, and we have to do it together. And then the next one. So I thought I'd better share a little bit about me, just so you know why I might be one of the people talking to you today. So here's a little bit of background. You can probably tell I'm not from Manchester, though I have lived in Manchester for over 30 years. So this is my Mancunian accent. This is as good as it's going to get. I first came to Manchester to study engineering, electrical and electronic engineering. So I'm sort of a boy who can break things. And I'm a chartered engineer, so I can break them properly so they will never work again. That's my thing to success on that one. And I worked in corporate life for about 10 years. I went into engineering insurance. That was the link into the Royal Sun Alliance Group. Had great fun there, did all sorts of things, got into e-business, and I was part of the team that actually created Rightmove. So those of you that buy or sell houses might be familiar with that. And I still get a kick actually whenever I go to the website thinking, we were involved in that. And then I've been working independently for about 20 years. I left, did an MBA, and had a few children all at the same time, which is not to be recommended. Can I just say, you should probably have better project management than that. But over the years, I've specialized in change management and leadership development. And here are some of the clients that I've worked with. So people like Rolls-Royce and AstraZeneca, United Utilities and BASF are a key client of mine. And I've also worked in the public sector. So I've worked with the NHS, particularly in a hospital in Middlesbrough, and also GMCA. So keeping it a bit closer to home. And then over there are some other things that I get involved in more on a volunteer basis. So I'm very passionate about women in leadership, women in business, women in STEM even. My engineering kicks in there. So I'm an ambassador for Women on Boards. I also host a monthly Women Leading in Business network, which is online. So everyone's invited to that if you're interested. I'm hoping some of you may have heard of Queen Bee Coaching, which is a free leadership coaching service from the Pankhurst Trust, which is delivered to women across Greater Manchester. So if that's of interest to you, or if someone you know, please do clock that. And GM for Women is also a Greater Manchester initiative led by Helen Pankhurst. And I'm involved in WIN, which is a women's international network. So again, if any of you are interested in stuff like that, feel free to connect with me. I'm also on different socials. I think my Twitter handle is @CM Boggiano, if anybody wants to link me into stuff that you're doing. And then finally, I've been involved the last 2 years as a lecturer in leadership at the University of Salford. So, I thought I was specializing in change management all this time, and actually change is leadership and leadership is change. So that's been quite interesting to learn that. So that's a bit about me. Okay, let's get started. So if we think about change, change is difficult. But not changing is fatal, so we may not like it, we may not want to do it. I actually have a personal theory that humans are brilliant at change. Like, we are one of the most adaptable species. What we may not be so happy about is change that's inflicted on us or change that's done to us. So we choose to change a lot, don't we? We choose to buy houses, get married, study, do all sorts of things. So we take it on. But it's just whenever we're not in control of the change, it doesn't feel so sweet. And so if change is difficult, but not changing is fatal, what does that mean? What does that mean for us as individuals? What does that mean for our teams, for our organizations, or our clients, or other stakeholders we may have? And I'm hoping this is an opportunity for you to think through some of those things today. And the next slide. Another thought I'd like to bring into the room today is sort of the macro environment that we're living in. This is actually a cartoon from a few years ago. I'm not sure it's very funny, but it was right at the beginning of COVID. And you can see there, we were all busy washing our hands, and we could see this big wave coming, and it looked huge. But actually behind that, there are more waves of change coming. The blue one there says recession. Let's call it what it is. I think Brexit's that one. And that's we're starting to see some of the impacts of that. But then behind that, there's an even bigger wave of change, climate change. And I think this is really coming to the fore. We've been talking about it for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I think we're living with the reality of it now. And as a species, we're going to have to act fast. And even behind that is an even bigger one, which terrifies me, biodiversity collapse. I'm not sure we've got our heads around what that means. But what I want you to take from this really is, COVID was a bit of a practice run. It was a bit of a dry run. And actually, I was reassured at how, as a species, we can actually react and pivot, even though I don't necessarily like that word. And I was impressed by how we did come together and change how we work, what we do. So I do have hope that we can do it. I'm just concerned that it always has to be an existential threat for us to actually get everything together to do that. So let's just remember these waves of change as a sort of wider context. Next slide. And also in this wider context, I'm not sure of how many of you have heard the word VUCA before. I certainly have been working with leadership teams and talking about it for quite a long time, at least 10 years. And it's sort of like, it was like a lovely concept, V is for volatility, when things are unpredictable and they change without clear patterns or trends. And U is about uncertainty, where things are really disruptive and the past isn't necessarily a good indicator of the future. And C is about the complexity, where things are complex and there's more than one thing going on and they're all interrelated. And so it's hard to work out which which sort of thread to pull to make something happen. And A is for ambiguity. You know, there's little real clarity on what's true, and it's very difficult to predict the impact of your particular actions or initiatives. And so I would be working with clients talking about VUCA as a concept and a sort of theory, an idea. Whereas actually what I've experienced is that's what we've been living through, you know, that it's like, oh, okay, I get it now. I can feel it now. This is completely different. And it's not just a little theory. And I think this is set to continue as a wider trend. Things are going to be more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so what does that mean? What does that mean for us as individuals? What does that mean for us as HR professionals? What does that mean for our leaders? What type of leaders do we need to grow and create so that they can deal in this situation and make decisions and survive and actually thrive? And I think that asks us bigger questions. And then if we look at the next slide, another concept I want you to think about is, you know, who's led the digital transformation of your organization? So again, this is something I've been talking about for a long time with organizations. And we would talk with the chief technology officer, or we would talk with the CEO, whereas actually the biggest change agent that and successful change agent has actually been COVID in the last 2 years. Could you imagine on January 2020 that you'd all be on Zoom or Teams or some other e-enablement platform by the end of March 2020 or the beginning of April? I mean, that speed and turnaround. And I think we've been living through quite a unique period and time, in that actually the technology was there to enable that. Can you imagine if this had happened 10 years previously or even 5 years previously? Our systems and processes just wouldn't have been set up to, I mean, we had to act fast, but I do think there was a bit of, I don't know if luck's the right word, but I mean, I was just relieved that we could still stay connected through these e-platforms. So that's a bit of thought, wider thought to set the context. If we look at the next slide, you will see that I now want you to do some work before we could progress. So let's use the chat box for this. And I'd really love you to add in, you know, what are your key challenges, key change challenges that you have right now? They might be on an individual level, they might be on a team level, they might be on a wider organizational level. But what are they? And is there anything in particular you might like to take away from this session today? And if you can add those to the chat box, it's always interesting to see where people are coming from on this. I'm hoping that's everyone typing. So I can see some things coming through there. William's telling us it's about supporting the safe transition into the new NHS GM integrated care, about supporting people back into a new situation, a new normal from Joanne, increased pressure from regulators from Penny, staff engagement and line manager, recruitment and retention, supporting staff through recovery and continued periods of pressure, uncertainty and resilience from Louise, digitizations, skills gaps in the new post-pandemic recruitment market, application process, keeping focused in uncertainty. So there's a lot going on, isn't there? And it's hard, you know, there's a lot, and there's lots of moving parts. So, you know, I don't know if you're all feeling this VUCA effect, but it's certainly from some of the things that you've added there, it seems like it feels real for people. Yvonne, focus on culture, and more culture. Yes, I completely am with you on that. Okay, so let's go to the next slide then. And do keep adding those if you'd like to. So I thought this was worth sharing because this is sort of what's going to happen today. This is a clue. I've got quite a lot of concepts and ideas to share. I'll be honest, probably too many, though it was hard to take some of them out. So I'm going to share with you a whole load of dots, really, knowledge, whatever. And what I'm hoping you're going to do is take the ones that are useful to you, and then you join your dots. Yeah, you take what, some of this will be useful, some of it may not be, but you take what's useful for you, and you can join your dots any way you like. And it, never fails to amaze me that this cat on the end is made up with the same dots as are on the other pictures. So again, it's about you taking what's useful to you and applying it in your context, that I'm hoping will work for you today. Next slide, please. So one of the first dots I'm going to share, which to be honest, I'm expecting all of you to be very, very, very familiar with. So this is the change curve. This is Fisher's process of transition. And certainly in the organizations I've worked in over the years, this has been a really useful tool to have discussions with people, and also can be used in helping to plan what's going on. And I'll just make a few points about this that are probably worth bearing in mind, as so much change is going on around us. So it tells us that there's emotional responses to change, and it tells us there's a process, which, to be quite honest, I quite like. The fact that it is a process means, okay, we can follow it or get through it, but we know it's sort of normal. So people sort of start off quite happy, and then they might feel a threat or fear or get really low and have a bit of depression. They could become hostile, or they often sort of gradually accept what's happening and then begin moving on forward. And if you can't find yourself on this curve, you may be in denial, okay? And that's okay, as long as you know you're in denial and you're not in denial about being in denial. I mean, I like to hang out there sometimes. It's, quiet. But as long as you know that's what you're doing, so that you can re-engage with the process at the right time. Another point is, more senior leaders are more likely to be right on this curve at any moment in time. And that's because they're more likely to have been privy to the information sooner. So they will have still had their emotional responses and followed this, but they'll be doing gradual acceptance and maybe even moving on whenever announcements are happening to a wider organization. And then they're all a bit surprised that people have an emotional response. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. And then a final point is, this looks like a one-way street. This looks like it comes from left to right, and it does, but it's not actually a one-way street. People can pendulum back and forth on this, and that's just something to be really aware of as HR professionals. And as you communicate more messages to an organization and to individuals and teams, just be aware that they're not all going in one direction, and also that they can be in many different places on this curve. Next slide, please. Another really useful model that a lot of corporate organizations like to use is Cotter's 8 steps for leading change. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this one as well. Certainly, we used this extensively when I worked with AstraZeneca and also Rolls-Royce, and I've seen it used really quite creatively. So I'll just talk through a few points and see where that takes us. The overarching sort of blue line where it says creating a climate for change, engaging and enabling the whole organization, and then implementing and sustaining change. That's very much about the unfreeze, change your organization, and refreeze analogy. So that creating the climate, you're unfreezing it, getting ready to change. Then you're enabling and engaging so that you're creating the new shape of an organization, again, whatever that is. And then the freezing that new shape, which is really important, otherwise it all sort of falls apart, is about implementing and sustaining the change. And what Cotter tells us, so Cotter and his team of researchers went into hundreds and hundreds of organizations and observed how successful they were in implementing change. And they put together this model. And they said, those that have been successful have followed these 8 steps, and actually they're in an order. And if you do them in this order, you're more likely to have successful change implementation. And also, they go together. So 1, 2, and 3 need to be done before you move on to 4, 5, and 6, before you move on to 7 and 8. And so increasing the urgency, why are we doing this? What's the point? Do we understand it? And can we articulate it? Building the guiding team. Who are the people that are doing this? Is it a core team of project individuals that are off on one side doing this? Or is it, a selection of senior leaders or certain influencers and activists throughout an organization that are going to be your guiding team? Certainly in the hospital work that I did, that's exactly how we did it. It was embedded into the existing organizational structure, and it worked really well. And getting the right vision. Now, this is a step that I often see people skip, or they do it too lightly. So it's getting the right vision to the right level of detail. So it's not just saying, oh, we're going to change and it's sort of over in that direction somewhere, but being able to articulate it so that people understand it. So that when you move to step 4 and communicate for buy-in, you're able to communicate some details that help them understand the context. Now, obviously, you can't work everything out. And in fact, step 5 and 6 is about engaging and enabling people to help implement the vision and plan it and design it. But you do need to have a firm enough vision for people to understand the work that they need to do. Step 5 is interesting. If we can go to the next slide, I've actually very deliberately included the words for this. So if we look at step 5 there, empowering broad-based action. So this is about removing obstacles to change, changing systems or structures that seriously undermine your vision, and encouraging risk-taking and non-traditional ideas. Now, I would like to ask, how many of you work in an organization that encourages risk-taking and non-traditional ideas, activities, and actions? And you can put a yes or a no in the chat. Julie, you work in an organization, that's great to know. Any more? Often when I work with clients, we've got a few no's, non-traditional ideas, yes. Locally, yes, that happens, Louise. I mean, that is really reassuring to know, because often I find this is one of the sticking points, is that encouraging risk-taking in an organization can be a real sticking point, and non-traditional ideas. So if that's happening, treasure it and harness it and do it. And that sounds like you've got a good organizational culture going. And then the next step, that's whenever you generate your short-term wins and you're evidencing what's happening. If we can just go back to the previous slide, often organizations get to 4 and 5 and even 6 in this step, but then they sort of stop and they forget to move to step 7 and 8, which is really about implementing and sustaining the change, making it stick. And if we go back to the words, please, that would be good. If we look at step 7, this is where you use increased credibility to change the systems, the structures, the policies that don't fit with the vision. And you also hire or promote or develop employees that can really implement it. So you're reinvigorating the process with new projects, themes, and change agents. And that's what really helps it stick. So again, I'm expecting you to be really familiar with Coder. Where I've seen this used very effectively is lining up the comms that need to go along this. You can also use it. You can use it as a bit of an audit on an existing project. So you can say, did we do all these steps, particularly one that's maybe not running the way you want to. They might have some problems, and you might find that maybe one of the steps have been missed out. And you can use it as a planning guide. So if you're planning something, you know, have we covered steps 1, 2, and 3 before we start doing 4 and 5 and 6? So it's quite a useful and well-tested model that organizations like. Okay, let's keep going then, and I'll show you a few more dots, as they say. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, this is sort of old stuff here. We know this. But what I think is, or what I find is, it's really useful just to bring it to the fore and have it in your mind. And Julie, I've seen you're looking at the blend of Cotter and VUCA world is interesting. That exactly my point. The blend of these models, if you think about them together, I think it actually gives you a bit of a richer picture. So if we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs against the change curve, you can really see why the emotional responses are happening. And you can see here there's 5 levels. So, you know, the first 2 levels are definitely hygiene levels, and possibly even level 3 is. So, you know, you need them as a bare minimum to keep people engaged and involved and feel safe at work. So that's where you're building your psychological safety from. And then your belonging and love needs and your esteem needs, they're motivational activities that help people, you know, go on to aspire to do more. And the thing to remember here is if something on a lower level is missing, you cannot build up to the higher level. So each level has to be satisfied to be able to go up to the next level. In organizations, most people operate around a level 3, belonging and love needs in a work group, and, you know, having good relationships with your colleagues. Or esteem needs, you know, they're looking for achievement and status and responsibility. You might find a few level 5s, you know, the real, I find it a bit zenny at level 5. You know, maybe Bill Gates is up there working on, you know, personal growth and fulfillment. But you might find yourself working at different levels depending on what you where you are. What I want you to think about is, what do you think happens in times of change? You know, if you're operating at a level 3 or a level 4 and there's an announcement or something happens, you know, people just don't tiptoe back down the levels. They sort of plummet like a stone. They've fallen right down. You know, you hear there's going to be a change in the organization and you're thinking, oh my goodness, is that me? How am I going to pay my mortgage? And it may not even be conscious. It could be subconscious that this is going on. And then you hear, oh, it's not my team, it's HR or IT or a different team. And you're thinking, oh, that's fine. And you can sort of crawl back up the different levels. But I think bearing in mind Maslow is useful for helping with the emotional responses, and can be useful for helping, you know, how do we communicate stuff to people when it's happening? Okay. Next slide. I'm conscious that I am chucking quite a lot of information at you, whether you like it or not. So if there's any particular questions, you know, feel free to put them in the chat and we will try to come back to them at some point. So let's keep going. The next model is about Tuckman's team development stages. And again, I'm expecting you're really quite familiar with this. So, you know, we know when, you know, a team is not a group of people who work together. A team is a group of people who trust each other. And when we bring a group of people together, you know, to make a team, they have to start at the beginning of the team building process. So they start forming, they're trying to work out who's who, how we fit together. Then they need to go through this storming phase where it's like, what, who, well, I'm not sure I agree with that. And that can feel a bit uncomfortable. And good leaders and good people managers help people get through the storming as safely and as quickly as is possible, but as slowly as they need to. So again, trying to make sure you're not stuck in that storming is very important. And then they normally get into the norming stage. And this is where you know, people start to understand what their role is, how it fits together, what the overall objective is. And you know, they get the measure of people. So it might be a bit, well, she's always grumpy on a Monday. She'll be grand tomorrow. Don't worry about it. And then where we really want to get to is this sort of high performance team. Yeah, where they're really working, you're feeling the magic, and it's sort of that word flow comes in. And this is where somebody's saying, you know, I need and you need a spanner, and somebody's standing there with a spanner to give to you. And I'm sure many of you can think of, you know, wonderful teams you've worked in that have really felt that magic of that high performance. And there is a step 5 in this, often called mourning or adjourning, you know, when you take a team apart. And this is useful and interesting to know, particularly, I think, in times of change, because often you're putting together teams to make a change happen and then taking them apart again. I mean, I do a lot of work in project teams, so I need to be really build in, you know, the forming, storming and norming to get to performing process as part of our team development up front, so that if we come under stress, which of course you always do at some point, we don't revert into storming and get stuck in there. And I think another point I would make on this is, if you're not finding storming, I would get suspicious. Yeah, you know, that's part of the natural process, and being able to have those sort of robust, icky conversations is part of the team building process. And then the final point on this slide is around what happens if somebody joins or leaves the team? What do you think happens to the whole team? And you probably know it's a bit like snakes and ladders. The whole team goes back to step 1. And again, good people managers and leaders either intuitively or explicitly know this. And so they build in processes for how to take, you know, a new team back through forming, storming, norming. And even if it's only one new person, it's really important to remember that. And it may be quicker the next time round, but it's definitely, it explains why if you're in a situation where there's lots of change and lots of people moving different teams, you never feel like you get settled, and you never feel like you get to that norming or performing stage. And it's because you're literally not there, because you keep having to go back to forming and go through storming again. So I think that's a point that's worth remembering in times of change. So then, let's look at the next slide. Now, this one's one of my favorites, but I'm not sure everybody gets it. So who knows what a fractal is? And they occur in nature, and they occur in computer programs and stuff. And a fractal is sort of a pattern. So you can see here, the blue one there is a pattern from a computer, and the fern is from nature. And basically, if you zoom in or zoom out, you see the same pattern. So if you zoom in on the leaf, you see the same little pattern on one leaf. And then if you zoom in again, it's the same pattern. And the reason why I think this is useful and important in change and in organizations is because often you see patterns of behavior happening at different levels. And they can be positive patterns or negative patterns. So it might be that you're pushing down work or stress onto a team, and then they push it down again and again. Or it might be that you're creating a positive behavior pattern, and then it's spiraling up or spiraling down. So it's just one of the things I look out for whenever I enter a new organization. Next slide, please. And yeah, do all the clicks on this slide, actually, because there's an awful lot. So The Dip is a great book by Seth Godin. And there's a lot in it, but the key message I'd like you to take out of this is there's always a dip. Anything worth doing, you always enter a dip somewhere. And if it's not a dip, again, get suspicious. Are we on a cliff that we're going to fall off at the end? Or is it a bit of a cul-de-sac that we're putting in more effort but not getting results? And again, the trick is, when you're in a dip, you don't want to quit when you're in the dip. Yeah, you need to push through, because that's where you're going to get your more effort is going to, the results are going to pick up. So I highly recommend this read to anyone, whether you're doing exams and you're going through the exam dip, or you're implementing organizational change across 9,000 people in a hospital. It can be really helpful to understand when you're in the dip and have that sort of common language around that as well. Next slide, please. And yes, Kath, fractals are from Frozen. Icicles are very good fractals. And then linked to the dip is sort of the tipping point. And this is where, you know, when you're doing something, it can feel really slow and hard work at the beginning, and you feel like you're pushing something really big up a hill. And, you know, that's where sometimes you have to put in actions to make sure it doesn't fall back down on you. But actually, at some point, you will hit the tipping point, and it'll roll down, and it gets easier from there. And you'll actually build up momentum to take you through the next challenge. And it's about keeping going and getting to that tipping point and benefiting from the snowball effect. So if we keep going to the next slide, that's sort of some of the concepts I wanted to change with you, or to share with you about change. And you know, I like this one. You know, change is an emotion, not a list. And we often try to project manage it as a list, but actually let's remember it's an emotion, and what that means, and what that means in our organization. So let's keep going and talk about culture. And as we've already heard, it's culture, culture, and culture. You know, what is organizational culture, and how do you do it? How do you do culture creation? And what does that mean for our organizations today? So if we look at the next slide, I've got some sort of little thoughts that I want to share with you. And if we think, what is it? So this is Edward Shane is telling us it's a pattern of shared basic assumptions, and it's learned by a group as it starts to solve problems of external adaptation or internal integration. And these are things that have worked well enough to be considered valid, and are therefore taught to new members as the correct way to perceive and think and feel. You know, so it demonstrates a good learning environment if you're learning things and then you're teaching it on, and it can be positive and it can also be negative. So on the next slide, you'll see, you know, there's things that are visible in culture, and there are things that are invisible. So the artifacts, the behaviors, the metrics, you can see these, and actually those are easier to change. And then those things that you can't see, the beliefs, the values, the assumptions, they're harder to change. So being aware of, you know, if you're doing a bit of a diagnostic, you know, can you articulate what these are for your organization? And so that'll help you work out what's harder to change and what's easier to change. And the next slide, you'll see we've just already, Louise has beat us to this quote from Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I've also heard it, you know, breakfast and lunch and dinner and everything else. But I mean, what does this tell us? What does this actually mean? And what it means is, you know, you may have a great strategy, but if you haven't got the culture to be able to implement it and get it across your organization, it is not worth it. I recently read an article which I found was really useful, and it was talking about the difference between culture and strategy. And it actually said leaders should be focusing 75% of their time on culture and 25% of their time on strategy. Now, whether they actually, you know, split their 100% that they've got on those two things alone is a different debate. But I just thought that was a really interesting ratio. If you're 25% strategy and 75% on culture. And then if we look at the next slide, in fact, this is where the stat has come from. You'll see senior leaders should spend 75% of their energy on culture. And you know, what is that? So culture is where you've got the human-centered design for the business, and what is that value proposition for our people? Whereas the strategy is more about the business model and the structures and resources, and it's the value proposition for our customers or our users. Culture is about ownership of the plan, whereas strategy is about creating the plan for how you'll win. You know, what is it we're going to do? What are we not doing? Strategy is often as much about what you're not doing as about what you are doing. And culture is about lifting the overall energy that's available and living and breathing the customer experiencing and leveraging whatever talent exists. Whereas strategy is about channeling that energy and focusing it on the right priorities, defining the customer experience, and defining what talent is needed. And, you know, in summary, culture is the way we do it here, and strategy is what we do and where we're going. And obviously you need both. You know, it's not one or the other, but knowing where your thinking is, knowing if you're thinking strategically or knowing if you're thinking about the culture, I think is useful, particularly as HR professionals, because you're having conversations around this all the time. So being able to articulate, you know, how it connects with the strategy and how it impacts is normally very useful. Next slide, please. And also in this, again, I'm expecting many of you to be very, very familiar with this. Simon Sinek really talks about, you know, you need to understand why you're doing it, why you're doing anything, and how that links to the strategy and also the culture. And if you think about the what, the how, and the why, you know, the what is what every organization on the planet know. You know, they know what they do and what products they sell or services they provide. And they often know how they do it and the processes that are required to deliver that. And these are the things that make them special and set them apart from their competition. But actually, why you're doing it and why you're doing what you do, and the why is not about making money, you know. And so understanding your why, you know, it's your purpose, it's your cause, or it's your belief. It's your very reason why your organization exists. And that really grounds people when they understand that. When they understand that about change, why we're making a certain change, that is really, really useful. So, you know, this is something to think about. I think naturally you probably do this again as HR professionals and you know, working in healthcare and stuff. I think you're sort of more likely to do this than maybe some of the more corporate organizations that I get the opportunity to work with. And you know, that's good practice if that's what you're doing. Next slide, please. And then here's like a 10-point plan. If you want to think about your culture, it's 10 sort of segments to look through, or to think about culture. You know, think about your environment. Is it a controlling environment or a harmonious one? Are there any constraints? Think about the time. How do you use time? Is it fixed or fluid, past, present, future? Are people busy doing or are people busy being in action? How do you communicate and how informal or formal is it? How is it public or private sector? So all these elements. So this is something that you can use again as a bit of a diagnostic to think about, can we articulate what our culture is, and looking through these 10 steps. And the next slide is a little quote I quite like. The culture of any organization is shaped by the worst behavior the leader is willing to tolerate. And I would stretch it out to say even the leaders are willing to tolerate. And we know as leaders, you know, what you're never not communicating. You're always communicating something. So what you do or what you don't do is communicating something. So being very cognizant of this is really important. Next slide. And finally, on culture, this is a really simple one, but I really like it actually. So it's back to what can we see and not see? You know, on a really superficial level, we've got artifacts and behaviors that are sort of evidence of a culture. On a sort of deeper level, what are the rules and policies and processes that underpin? So that's where you can start making some changes that might impact some of the behaviors. But actually at the deepest level, values and beliefs, I mean, they're really hard to change. And I would debate whether or not we actually need to change them, or do we? So, you know, but you're getting into a really deep level of identity when you're starting to try and change that. So we've looked at change and we've looked at culture. It is a whistle-stop tour and I'm conscious of the time. So let's have a really quick look at some ideas around well-being and resilience. I noticed somebody mentioned resilience earlier in the session. And resilience is that sort of hard to describe quality. You know, when you're knocked back, you sort of come back stronger than ever. And rather than letting the failure or setback drain you, you sort of find a way of rising from the ashes. And if you just keep clicking, you'll see that, you know, some people call resilience sort of bounce back ability. I mean, I think in the world we're living in now, it's more appropriate to sort of bounce forward rather than bounce, but we're not going back anywhere. We are going forward. And Tigger would be my champion for bounceability. You know, life's not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but how well you bounce. Next slide, please. And if you think about why is resilience useful or helpful? So it helps you to flex and, you know, yes, we can have a plan, but we can flex from the plan as well. It helps you with withstanding shocks. And in a VUCA world, we're probably only going to have more of those. It helps you to adapt to change, both at an organizational level and a team level and an individual level. It helps you to pursue your goals. So sort of keeping your eyes on the prize. So even if you have to deviate and go around a different way, you know, keeping your strategic intent can be useful. And it helps you anticipate risk and protect your weak spots. So it's not about removing them. It's just being able to go, right, that we are where we are, and now what are we going to do? Adele, you're saying resilience to you is about the supportive networks that you have around you, and it's very much, which can very much be included your workplace. I would agree with that, definitely. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just flash these next few up as resources that you can go to that are really useful. So the Resilience Institute has shared this. It's a spiral. I like this one because it shows you both on an individual level and on an organizational level when you've got a positive spiral of building resilience, or if you're get into a negative spiral. And again, as a HR professional, I'm hoping this might be useful to you. The next one I'm going to steer you to is check out the Centre for Creative Leadership. There's a great paper there on 8 practices of building resilience. So looking at the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the social. And it's, again, it's very practical. And, you know, are you getting enough sleep and exercise and staying connected to people? I think we really saw this coming to the fore during COVID and lockdown. You know, were we keeping our connections, and were we grateful for what we had, even though we were in a really tricky situation, and what mindfulness activities could we build into our lives that were sort of easy to do, everything from taking a walk in the park to maybe doing some other activities. The next slide, please. And it's not just about building resilience in yourself, is it? It's about, how do I help others do this? I really like this little image because, you know, some days you feel like doing it and some days you don't. I don't know about you, but I don't want to run up the steps every day. Some days I feel great and I'm running up the steps. Some days I'm that one sulking at the bottom going, I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it. I can't do it anyway. And so this can be a useful tool, you know, if thinking about, well, which step am I on today, or which step are the people I'm working with? And it helps you have a level of conversation with them. If you know where they are, then how you communicate with them can be adapted appropriately. Next slide, please. So a final few thoughts really is about, you know, checking your energy levels. I mean, I don't think any of you would go to bed at night without putting your phone on charge. Is that right? Or is that just in my house this happens? And so let's, you know, how do you recharge yourself? How do you keep yourself going? And where are you? And this is just a little sense check, a bit like, you know, well, I'm feeling great, I can do it, or I'm feeling good. Or, well, today I'm okay, it's Friday, you know, energy levels are getting a bit low. Or are you being a bit meh, or struggling, or empty? And so working out where your energy levels are, and then working out, well, what is it that gives me energy? What do I need? What, you know, is it it may not be a bar of chocolate, it may be a walk or a sleep or whatever, spent time with people. I think it connects back to those 8 resilience practices. And just understanding that you need to build into your life, you know, keeping your battery charged, and also not expecting that you can be in full whack all the time. And then a final thought for you, and I will be honest, this is the mantra I am trying to live by. I'm not sure I've cracked it, but I'm certainly using it as a bit of a guide. When things aren't adding up in your life, start subtracting. Now, again, in organizations, this is not really something we're encouraged to do. I don't think, we're given more things to do. We're given, and again, as so much has changed in the last few years, we sort of adapted and we did things in a different way. And now we're sort of coming into the next phase of what we're doing, and we're doing everything we were doing before, plus more, plus maybe a bit more. And so I think there's a real opportunity to think strategically about this and tactically. If things aren't adding up, don't keep adding more. What can we subtract? And that just makes me feel a bit better when I think of it that way. It's tricky to do, but I think I love that it's an equation. It speaks to the mathematician or engineer in me. So let's start subtracting. So next slide, please. So this is my suggested, if we'd had more time today, we would have done breakout groups, and I would be and actually feel free to put stuff in the chat now. It'd be really good to see some stuff, but I'd really like to encourage you to think through, what is going well, what is working, and what would be even better. And the other activity it's a similar activity, just coming at it from two different angles. What do you need to stop doing? Start subtracting. What would you like to start doing? Like, what are some of maybe those resilience practices that you want to put in place for yourself, or some other ideas you've had around change and culture? And what do you want to continue doing? Okay, what do you want to stop, start, and continue? And I think that's me. Again, as a whistle-stop tour, I've sort of slammed everything at you. I hope you've managed to pick up a few dots that are useful to you. And I hope, for the rest of today and wherever, you're able to make some connections that are useful to you. And I'll hand back. Is it to you, Janet or Shenny?
I'm not sure. I was just texting Shenny to check. I'm happy to say a big thank you. That's been, actually for me, it's been really, really great, because it's an hour to actually focus on, International HR Day, people issues. When you're running at 100 miles an hour, which I think most of us probably are, it's often the first thing that goes is any time to kind of focus on your own professional development and thinking about why we do what we do in the first place. So big thank you, Claire Marie. It's been fantastic, and there's some great comments in the chat box as well. Did you want to say anything, Shenny, at the end?
Yeah, I was just going to extend a huge thanks for somebody who's a bit of a geek around culture and culture theory. That was brilliant, because it all kind of came into one place. And the joining of the dots, I was definitely kind of going, oh, I'd forgotten about Cotter, and I remember kind of anchoring it with other stuff as well. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for all of you. I know it's really difficult to take some time out at the moment, so I'm really pleased that we've been able to kind of get together on this Friday morning. As always, we'd like a little bit of feedback, actually. I'm just going to ask everyone if we can do a quick 2-minute Menti, and then hopefully you'll get a couple of minutes back to go and boil the kettle or do a little bit of a stretch. Before we go into that, Claire Marie, I just want to say a huge thank you so much. Please do stay for the Menti, don't disappear anywhere. And for those, I think I put it into the chat earlier on, we will share all those slides, so we'll turn it into a PDF, and I'll email it out a little bit later today. So let's get on with this Menti. So for those of you who know how Menti works, it's www.menti.com, and you'll be asked for a code, and the code is on your screen. It's 93802572. That's 93802572, and that code will stay at the top of the screen. So I'll give you about 30 seconds or so just to find yourself in the Menti itself. Wonderful. I can see people coming up. Thank you so much for sharing your love through the little love hearts. It always helps. Okay, so first question. Just want a quick check-in. Whereabouts are you from across our people profession? So it's International HR Day. Of course, we're talking about all of our people professions. So we've got HR, OD, inclusion, talent, wellbeing, learning development, engagement and comms, leadership, mentoring and coaching, just to give us a little bit of an idea of who's in the room. Okay, so it is International HR Day. over 70% of our audience are from an HR background, and understandably so. But really important that we triangulate all of our people professions together to really kind of look at what Claire Marie's been describing this morning. Thank you so much. Okay, just a quick check-in. How energized do you feel after this session? Has this morning's session shared any insights into our people profession that you'd kind of gone, aha, or I'd forgotten about that? And has it helped you understand what you might want to be involved with moving forward? So this is a barometer of a 1 to 5, and the scale is from very little to in abundance. So give us your feedback and we can get a little bit of a sense. Brilliant. It feels like people are feeling energized on a Friday morning, end of a really long, busy week. It's a little bit grey out there. I've just seen the rain starting to come down. But feeling energized by the conversations this morning. That's brilliant. Wonderful. Okay, and I think we've pretty much got everyone there. So we'll move on to the last question, which is, what has resonated with you from this morning's session? So Claire Marie's put a call to action to think about the start, stop, continue. And I can't remember the other thing, the keep calm and carry on approach. So what would be really great is to understand what's resonated with you. What's worked well, and even better if. Thank you, Claire Marie. Okay, so we've got lots of things coming in. We've got culture, resilience, start subtracting, balance is moving around really quickly. Compassion, culture over strategy, culture versus strategy, working together, remembering to subtract, group dynamics, engagement, emotional response, frozen fractals. That made me smile. Lots and lots there. Absolutely. I'm going to leave this one open for a little while. Please keep adding to it. What I'll do is I'll PDF the word cloud and I'll send it along with the slides so you can have a little bit of a look at it, because I suspect it might be a little bit helpful for all of you. It's 10:29. Never want to be late when we're running a meeting. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Happy International HR Day, happy People Profession Day. Hope you enjoy whatever activities you've got going on in your organisations or whatever you're doing for the rest of the day. And hopefully we will see you all soon at one event or another. Take care of yourselves and have a safe weekend. Bye, everyone. Fantastic. I suspect lots of people are rushing off to 10:30 meetings and things like that, so. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire Marie. That was brilliant. And you are on mute.
Yeah, just about came in on time there.
I completely appreciate and understand the struggle to keep everything as concise as possible and cover all those dots that you were describing. So yeah, no, really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I will pick up all the logistic-y stuff with you by email. Hopefully that's all. Yeah. Siobhan's been in touch with you, so we'll
yeah,
kind of
I was really busy this last week, so I haven't done any of the admin-y stuff, but I do have time next week to do all of that, so that's on my list.
Not a problem. I'll just make sure that we're looking out for it at our end. And I do owe you a very big glass of whatever it is that you fancy. So yeah, hope to see you soon.
No problem. Cheers, Shani.
On a women's march somewhere, probably.
Indeed, or a TEDx.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you.
All right, then, you too. Happy HR Day.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye.